Alafia. My name is Jay, and I'm your Nubian Queen, and I welcome you so much to my channel today. Today, we're going to do a reaction video on YouTuber's What If Alt Hist video on explaining the United States in 10 ethnicities, specifically on his portion about Black Americans. So let's get into it. And yes, I have some thoughts.
Number three, African Americans. God, I feel like I could literally say anything here and it'd be construed as offensive by one of the political extremes. However, I'm just gonna try to do my best to search for the truth and hope that works. African Americans.
Okay, right here, we jump off the bat and boom. Like, you're worrying about political extremes, but did you think about how it would sound to us black folk, us black Americans? You're talking about us as a non-black person, as a white person, and just off of that, you didn't even consider how it would make us feel by the way you talk about us.
Came over to America largely so the Southern elite could replicate nobility back in Europe, while white Americans were unwilling to be their peasants. America was peripheral to the Atlantic slave trade since it didn't make sugar, which was the big moneymaker of the time. Thus, America got a lot of those stubborn and free-thinking slaves from the Igbo and Yoruba people.
And the people were not slaves. Igbo and Yoruba people and the Congo people and the other people that he mentions are not slaves. They were enslaved. You know, they, you know, they, mm, yeah.
Of modern Nigeria, who populated the northern south, while meanwhile the southern south was largely people from the Congo and Angola. The ancestors of most of modern-day African Americans came over in a 40-year period from 1700 to 1740. American slavery, when compared to the rest of the world at the time, was a weird combination of really bad and less bad. Since America was majority white, slaves had less social mobility, independence, or dignity than other slave societies in the Americas, because if a black person had any degree of social upward mobility, they'd just say, why doesn't a white man do that job?
I'm going to stop it right there. Enslaved Africans in the rest of the Americas that weren't afforded any additional dignity because they were the majority in their places. No, far from it. The enslaved Africans in the rest of the Americas had they had shorter lifespans, and thus they were worked brutally and died much quicker once they were trafficked over to the Americas. There was no dignity in that. They had to hide their indigenous beliefs. They had to. It's like I am not liking how folk like to compare the enslavement of Africans here in the what is now the United States of America and in the rest of the Americas. Yeah, sure, the vast majority of enslaved Africans were trafficked to the rest of the Americas. And sure, the United States of America now has the largest black or African descendant population, second to Brazil in the Americas. But that does not mean that it's the slavery that enslaved Africans faced here in the United States of America was any less brutal. So let's toss that out.
Slaves were forbidden from learning how to read, keeping families, normally operating on the market, and many states forbade or made it very difficult for masters to free slaves. However, since
True.
America had such a high standard of living in general, American slaves had better standards of living and quality of life than slaves in other areas of the Americas, and even than many peasantries in European countries like Ireland or Ukraine.
So this is a myth. This is a myth. Um, This is a yes. The enslaved Africans in what is now the United States of America had a longer lifespan, meaning they lived longer from the time they were captured until they died, or if they were born in their place, they had somewhat longer lifespans. But the standard of living wasn't better necessarily. I think what maybe getting what he's missing is many of the enslaved Africans here in the United States of America were enslaved in more temperate climes. So there weren't as many tropical diseases that routinely killed everyone, let alone enslaved Africans. They didn't get as much yellow fever or malaria or other mosquito-borne illnesses in uh, much of the area that enslaved Africans were forced to toil in the United States as they did compared to the more tropical areas like Jamaica, Cuba, Haiti, Brazil. You know what I mean? So people, yeah, yeah.
Black American culture was created by white America to strip them of any ability to resist and dehumanize them. They were forced to renounce their African names, religion, and languages that could have given them an identity. They were removed from their families, prevented from gaining any tradable skills or education. If there's any historic equivalent to being raised by an abusive, alcoholic, narcissistic parent, it's this.
Okay, pause. Pause, 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 pause. White people did not create black culture. Period. Period. Yes, they brutalized and beat and forced enslaved Africans to not use the indigenous cultures that they had. And yes, they forced them to not even use their names. And yes, they did all of these brutal things, but they did not create black culture. Black culture is in many ways a form of resistance to what white people forced my ancestors to do. It's many ways a resistance. They tried to keep as much as they possibly could. So no, don't no, no, no.
Black Americans became symbols and scapegoats for the white Southern society. There was mass hysteria about black men sleeping with white women, while at the same time, white men were raping black women at such a rate that a quarter of the African American genomes of European origin. At the same time, there was a good deal of cultural mixing between white and black culture, even during the colonial period. Remember, during slavery, white and black Americans lived in extremely intimate conditions, often as lovers, friends, co-workers, nannies, and the like. White American food, religion, architecture, and music were all influenced by African forms. A great irony.
I take umbrage of the word often as lovers. Sure, there may have been some relationships that, if the people were not the property of the other person, could be construed as being consensual. But when you are literally the property of someone, you have no right. You have no ability to consent to a relationship.
Is that the Ku Klux Klan might have been based off an African precedent, since very similar organizations exist in West Africa.
Yeah, no. I know what he's trying to compare stuff to, but no. This is like blaming black people for our own oppression. It really is, yo. I get that may not be what he is intending to say, but to say that the Ku Klux Klan got their idea of how to structure their organization based off of indigenous African societal secret societies is ludicrous. I'm not saying that they didn't get some of these structural ideas from them. I'm just saying the correlation should not be made like that. Like right here, he says, the greatest irony is that the racist organization, the KKK, is probably based on parallels in West Africa of men's organizations that brutally lynch those who break cultural norms or ethnic outsiders. I guess he doesn't know that much about European history. I'm just saying that because there are plenty of what's the word I'm looking for? Fraternal type organization in Europe that did a whole lot of brutality against other Europeans. Lest we forget about the rampant anti-Semitism in Europe. Lest we forget about the rampant xenophobia in Europe. Now, that has existed for centuries. They literally fought wars because no, You're not going to blame black people for our own oppression, for our own brutality. Yeah, no.
With the end of slavery, you saw a retrenchment of white supremacy in the South for another 100 years, in which blacks were prevented from voting and often had any real attempts at leadership or success result in lynching or vigilante hangings. However, this legal discrimination was brought to an end by the remarkable and admirable movement by Martin Luther King to gain legal equality.
Pause. Only the wonderful Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. Only that. He literally said the movement by Martin Luther King. That tells me he knows nothing about the history of the civil rights movement. Nothing. Nothing at all. If that's the only person you could think of to say that this movement was promulgated by. Fannie Lou Hamer, Bayard Rustin, Malcolm X. I could keep going on. Ralph D. Abernathy. I could just keep going. Oh. It's so angering, yo, that when white folk think of the civil rights movement in general, they only think of Martin Luther King. Only, like, yes, the Reverend Doctor, because he was a Reverend and he was a doctorate. So Reverend Doctor Martin Luther King Jr. was an amazing person who did a lot of work and led a lot of work in the civil rights movement. I would never not say that. However, to only say the civil rights movement by Martin Luther King completely erases the work of every other person, of the thousands of persons who toiled to, get any kind of freedom for their fellow black people. From national figures all the way down to local figures. It was not just one human. And he says that discrimination came to an end. No, it did not. Sure, many laws were made. Most discriminatory laws were ended, but that's not the end of discrimination. By far.
100 years ago, almost all blacks lived in the South, and especially an area of the Deep South called the Black Belt.
The way he could just see blacks is telling me all I need to know. The blacks.
But during the World Wars, you saw a massive black migration to major cities in the north and California. Interestingly enough, you see a cultural process identical to what was happening in Africa at the very same time, called anomie. Before the 1960s, black Americans had higher marriage and lower drug usage rates than the white community, and significantly lower crime rates than afterwards, as well as being a community that, when polled, had massive interest in education. However, some shift that I don't fully understand occurred in the 1960s that resulted in an epidemic of crime, family breakdowns, lower educational interest, and drug usage in the black community.
I'm just going to pause here. If you go and watch his video, and when he talks about the other 9 ethnic groups he talks about, this is the only one where he puts in figures like this. Like, he'll briefly mention how many Scotch-Irish folk, are working class or poor. He'll briefly mention that. But he doesn't go into details like, the breakdown of the family units. Murders. Oh, this or that. No. He only does that for black folk. And he says he doesn't fully understand. There's ways to... You know how you can understand something? Is do some actual research. There are plenty of books about what happened during this period of time. I'm going to get back to that.
For some perspective, black people commit 5 times the per capita murder rate of white people, while there's a 26-point gap in educational achievement. In general, black America...
Yeah, this is angering. So he says the mm, he, I got to cool off. I'll be right back.
Thrive through individuals and decayed as a collective. Black people are incredibly overrepresented in pop culture and have gained worldwide fame. Black America.
We're incredibly overrepresented in pop culture. Yet it's always news when a black person wins an award. Please explain. Or it's always news when a black person leads some of these movies. Please explain. It's like it's not. It's like it's not even paying attention to what's going on.
Has been vital to every element of American culture, however, especially so in music, where black people effectively created the genres of rap, rock, soul, gospel, jazz, funk, among others, even influencing mostly white genres like country. This is an immense credit to the black community and remarkably impressive. It's crazy to see wealthy suburban kids try to act like gangsters, and I just think, you know, those gangsters would be happy to switch lives with you. I was watching a music video from the weaker Justin Bieber, Appalachian, and he had a black American to give him street cred and rep him up, which is amazing for an area of the world 7,000 miles away from the black belt. At the same time, the income gap between black and white people has grown, and a huge percentage of the black community lives in degrading poverty. We know this income gap largely isn't caused by discrimination, given that Nigerian Americans have higher incomes than white Americans, and black people whose ancestors are immigrants from the West Indies or whose ancestors were free before the Civil War are significantly wealthier than the rest of the black community.
Okay. So hold the heck on. Several hundred years of enslavement, 100 years of legalized Jim Crow. That somehow magically, black families and households are supposed to have the same household income and wealth as the people who oppressed and enslaved them. Please explain. Please make it make sense. Somehow magically, but it has nothing to do with discrimination. Nothing to do with discrimination, huh? And just because most discriminatory laws were repealed or made illegal in the 60s during this civil rights movement does not mean discrimination ended. Far from it. All you have to do is look at disparate outcomes. Unless he's one of those that believe disparate outcomes is rubbish. But if you have laws and policies out that create a disparity in outcomes for black and brown people, that clearly means that there's something wrong with that. And many of the policies and laws that are out here create disparate outcomes among black folk. And he earlier said the crime rate. Well, no, he didn't say crime rate. He said the murder rate, and he earlier said the breakdown in the family, and then he talked about the household income, and he said discrimination is not a part of it, but he fails to mention so many things. The the literal assassination of our leaders by the FBI, the CIA, et al. By the federal government. COINTELPRO is a real thing. They go look that up. The the government, it's been shown time and again that the CIA helped, what's the word, promulgate um, specific drug usage among black communities, or the war on drugs, alone, which caused a spike. I mean, a massive spike in imprisonment in this country. Like, to this day, the United States of America imprisons more people than any other country. Like, it but, the 1994 crime bill, the I can keep going on. I'm trying. It's angering. I'm trying to stay calm, but to say all this and not show the things that actually caused it, and to say things like, "Oh, it's not because of discrimination." Studies show that black folk use drugs at the same rate as white folk, but somehow black folk are the ones that's being arrested for it at a higher rate. But he goes on to say that drug use increased in black communities. No, drug use increased in the United States of America as a whole, and the policing of it increased in the black communities. That's what happened. Like, of all the drugs being imported into the United States, the illicit drugs being imported into the United States of America, almost none of that is by black folk. But somehow, black folk are the ones that's in prison for it. Please explain. Um, and let's talk about the crack cocaine epidemic. You know, there was a serious lack of concern among white America about the rising in addiction of rock cocaine. And the thing is, rock cocaine affected white America at the same rates, but you only saw black folk as the face of rock cocaine. So it's like, and like these programs that are out now, which I'm glad they're out, don't get me wrong, about the opioid epidemic and like trying to help people with that. They were the exact opposite during the explosion of rock cocaine. The exact opposite. Instead of trying to provide help, they say let's just lock them all up, lock them all up, and throw away the key.
Studies found that there's no IQ or education.
Oh, and he mentions, I'm sorry. Oh, he mentions that Nigerian Americans and West Indian Americans, have a higher household incomes and wealth than regular Black Americans. One, gross. I'm not a regular Black American. I'm a Black American. Two, he does this without looking at the United States immigration laws. The United States, you know how hard it is to get into the United States of America when you're from some countries. Specifically, the United States has, they may not call them quotas, but they have severe limitations on immigration from African countries and from West Indian countries. Unless you have an education. They select, like, if you have a doctorate, boom, you can get here. If you are going here for university, you have a higher chance of getting here. But if you are regular working class Nigerian, you have almost no chance. If you're a regular working class West Indian, you'll have almost no chance. So what you're basically doing is comparing an upper echelon of immigrant black folk to all black folk. So like if you were to compare the upper echelon in terms of income and education of, as he calls, regular Black Americans, they would be on par with that of immigrant Black Americans. And then if you look at the descendants of those immigrant Black Americans within one generation, they are in the same boat as quote unquote regular Black Americans. It shows that it's because of the immigration policies. That's why it shows that. And two, racism comes in quick and decapitates any continued growth in household and generational wealth, as they would like to say.
Between black and white children of American military members raised abroad, but cultural and social factors in America create said differences. I'm going to get my...
Cultural and social factors in America create said differences. I wonder what those are. Racism, maybe? Okay, let's break it down some. He says that the scores of black and white students of U.S. Military personnel overseas are virtually the same, and but compared to here. Well, let's look at what happened in the United States over the past several hundred years. One, yes, let's not even do several hundred years. Let's say after the enslavement of Africans, banks would not lend to black households to build new homes. In fact, it got to the point that the federal government pretty much made it illegal to by the process of redlining. Yes, redlining is a thing. Look it up. It is a real thing. If you lived in a neighborhood, if there was a neighborhood that was black, the federal government refused to insure those loans, to back those loans. So that meant that black people could not get FHA loans. They could not get any of these loans that the 30-year loans that happened. They couldn't get any of those. This led to um, black folk not be able to build wealth in household because the vast majority of United States of America's people's wealth is in their home ownership and generational home ownership. So like that house that your great grandmother bought for $5,000 that's now in a desirable area of your city, they can sell for what that their descendants can sell for $2 million. Black folk couldn't get that. They couldn't get that loan to buy that house. So that boom, all of that wealth gone. And then on top of that, the GI Bills. After World War II, you had the GI Bills. They literally did not give the GI Bill to black GIs, or when they did, they reduced what they can get. But there was no discrimination. Um, Wage gap. So I'm sure most people have heard of the women's wage gap. How on average, a woman makes 77 cents for every dollar a man makes. Well, there's also the racial wage gap, and then there's the black women's wage gap, and so on and so forth. White people for the same jobs get paid more than black folk. Period. And schools are based on communities. Like in most of the country, your school district is based on your neighborhood, and they get most of their funding from property taxes. And your property taxes is based on the value of all the property inside the district. So if you don't get that much property tax revenue, you're not going to get the best services. So therefore, communities with a high property tax basis get really good services compared to communities with lower property tax basis. And then even in states where school districts are more county-wide, um, it's been shown that they funnel the funds to the wider schools, to the more suburban schools. So there's a reason why the scores are less. It's not an achievement gap. Black folk achieve all they want. It's a resource gap. But discrimination is not a real thing.
A controversial opinion out now, but I don't think the current emphasis and direction that the black community gets preached at by social justice is healthy. Imagine, just as an example, if you were a psychologist or friends with the metaphorical black community, which was coming out of centuries of oppression and trauma. You would never tell it to build its entire identity around victimhood and say that there's nothing it can do and try to get concessions from the rest of society. You would try to find a way to come to terms with the awful things that had happened and do what was right going forward. For example,
you know what's right going forward?
Rap culture and the idea that
you know what's right going forward? Reparations. Period. How do you expect the people who are literally property to somehow suddenly magically have the same amount of wealth and income as their oppressors? Please explain. Reparations. That's the positive way for it. Talking about not trying to get stuff on the rest of the community. Girl, no. Black culture is not about one of victimization.
That education is seen as playing the white man's game in a lot of...
Oh my lord, I'm gonna need white folk to stay out of black folks' business. Period. You clearly don't know nothing about black culture to say this. To say that in rap culture is education is a white man's game. That has never been a thing. Sure, there's been some teasing among black folk about like, oh, you speak white or such and such. You know, yes, that is a thing. However, it's not for not wanting education. You could ask every parent, every black parent, and they will tell you they want their children to have the best education they possibly can get. They want their children to go to college or go to trade schools to have good careers. This is some BS. This is utter BS by someone who clearly knows nothing about black culture. So I'm gonna need you to stay out of it, to stop speaking about it. In this entire video, he doesn't go on his high horse and preach about what other communities need to do. He only does this about black community. None of the other communities. He didn't do this about the indigenous communities, about the English communities, about the Italian, about the Irish, the Scotch Irish, and so forth. But the black community, he gets on his high horse and talks down to us. Like we don't know what the hell we're talking about. Like we don't know what our experiences are.
Modern black culture is extremely counterproductive and unhealthy for the whole black society. I have total sympathy for the black community and trusting the...
We don't need your sympathy. We do not need your sympathy. Your pity. We don't need none of that. What we need is equality, and what we need is equality. We need liberation. We need freedom. That's what we need. We don't need your sympathy. You can miss me with your sympathy.
America, after everything that's happened, would be extremely difficult. However, I don't see why the modern wokes aren't just another brand of white elites who are trying to use black people for their own gain.
He says here, improve literacy, fund more trade schools, end the war on drugs. Please tell me, what part is this something that black folk control? Do we control the war on drugs? Tell me. But remember earlier he said there was no discrimination. He said there was no discrimination. Like, discrimination wasn't the cause of anything, but then he puts here to end the war on drugs. Please, this is not making sense. The math is not mathing, as they say. Fund more trade schools. Yes, we need all the trade schools that we can get. Improve literacy. I'm not going to say, yes. But to say that black culture is a culture of victimization is utter BS. It's bullshit. It's utter BS. It clearly shows you know nothing about our culture. It shows you know nothing about it. And he found a black person that he could use to make his point. Tell me, doesn't that sound like how a lot of white folk do? My black friend, boom, he shows it. He ignores the dozens, the hundreds of other black books by black authors about the discrimination we face, about the racism we face. Institutional, systemic, and interpersonal racism are all actual things that we face on a daily basis. It just completely befuddles me. What if alt-hist, whatever your actual name is, keep black folk, keep black culture, keep Africans, keep all of us out your mouth. Thank you so much for watching my video today. Yes, I got a little heated I tried to stay calm, but when I first saw this video, it made me so angry that caused me to make this video. You can follow me here, like, comment, and subscribe, please. And generally I will be posting videos about black genealogy and things of that nature. So like my path of researching my family and like my DNA and stuff like that. You can follow for more of that, and I'll probably also make some more videos like this, some reaction videos to people talking about Black culture, because that's my thing. I'm a Black person, and I know what my culture is about. You can follow me on Instagram and TikTok at Nubian Queen J. That's NubianKWEENJ, and on Twitter at JJames3000. Again, thank you so much for watching this video. Like, comment, and subscribe. And you have a wonderful day.